Hi, everyone. Welcome that you are coming back to the innovation series that My Future NC is hosting with all of our FAFSA Innovation Grant winners. I am so excited to share with you Rebecca Lester. She is with Person High School, and she is here to talk a little bit more about their 2021 innovative strategies that really helped launch them into our FAFSA grant winner. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm so excited to be here.
So, the work that you all have done, I was really excited to read your application and see the one-on-one support that your school community and your counselors had put forward, some of the incentives that you had for students. And then I think the piece that was a real true spark was the stories to inspire. I'd love for you to be able to share with everybody here how you all went. I mean, you had a 19.2% increase. We're looking at data from the mid-August timeframe. And so if you could share a little bit about your school community and then some of the things that you employed.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to share. We had a crazy year last year, as many high schools did. And we had, thankfully, I have a really amazing administration who was really behind getting FAFSA completion to be a thing. And so just, from my perspective and from my experiences with my high school, it was really a village kind of raising this FAFSA completion for our students. And it took a lot of people. It took the families, it took our administration, it took our counselors. And thankfully, there is a position for a college advisor at our high school, and that was a really big asset to the community as a whole, just to have someone there to help them, especially the families, complete their FAFSAs. And so, yeah, I'd love to share a little bit about kind of what my community is like first, and then I'll go into those initiatives that we employed. But just to give kind of a little bit of a background of Person High School, we are in a rural part of the county, or in the state of North Carolina, and we are pretty close to the Virginia border. We have at our high school, we've got a little over 1,000 students, so we're pretty large. And we do have some of those breakdowns you can see on the right of just kind of our diversity and our average class sizes. But we do have quite a few students, and we've got a little over 300 to 1 as our counselor to student ratio. So we have a large population of students and not as many staff members to assist them in, especially the college going process. So, but I did want to mention too about our FAFSA completion over the years. Because of COVID, we did see a 38% total completion in 2019 and 2020. There was that drop off in March, which we had a lot of success completing more FAFSAs last March and beyond, which that previous year did not see. So there was a difference in the FAFSA completion overall, especially during that COVID period. But we have increased, especially last year, we increased our numbers quite a bit even before the pandemic. So I can kind of speak to how that increase happened, but just to give a gist as well about where our students are going. Many of our students actually go to our community college right down the street, it's about 10 minutes away. So we have a really good access to that sort of higher education. And then also about 24% on average typically go to a four-year school. So that's a little bit about our population, what sort of students we're working with. I know that can be challenging to see a school and say, well, how accessible is the innovation things that you guys are doing going to replicate at our school? So hopefully that information can provide some support for some of the counselors in other places. But just to get into some of those initiatives, with over 1,000 students and populations, and our seniors are typically a little over 200, between 200 and 250. It can be really difficult to get that many students to complete one form, especially the FAFSA. But we had a lot of success in our school working specifically with appointments. There were a lot of times where we would have FAFSA nights. We did 2 of those where we'd have actual one-on-one assistance that those students were signing up for, especially virtually. So last year, we did not host anything in person because of the limitations at the time. And so those virtual one-on-one appointments were really amazing for our students. A lot of times they would sign up for appointments and not come. So there was a lot of follow through from our counseling staff as well as myself to get those students back into a space where we can meet with them if they miss those appointments. But that does come back to this one-on-one assistance that our school really tried to implement. A lot of times our families would have to complete a FAFSA. In order to do so, that would take multiple meetings because either they forgot information to bring with them or the FAFSA website did not work properly. So there were a lot of day and even evening appointments that we would try to schedule to provide that support. Sometimes with last year, we actually could provide socially distant appointments with families. And so, especially in the spring semester, we saw a lot of increase in our numbers, I think mostly due to our in-person socially distant meetings that I was able to host with a lot of the families. But I do want to also highlight that our counseling staff was really amazing in that when they met with seniors, they would introduce the FAFSA to them in those initial meetings, and then they would refer them to me as they were completing it or if they had any trouble with it. So that was a big support system. Was not only was I available to help the students, but the students were referred to the college advisor, and that was really, really helpful to give them assistance. We also had some exposure, and this is something that we were really excited to do last year. Our students, we got to have a staff member share some of their story of the FAFSA with our students. And it was an anonymous story that I shared out because the staff member, we had met them and I had been in a meeting and there were some people in it, and she was part of that story in that meeting, and she had mentioned FAFSA. We were talking about it as an administrative kind of problem that we had so few people completing it, and she started sharing her story, and it was very inspirational. And I'll kind of show it in a little bit and kind of summarize what happened. But with that story, we shared it out over social media and also printed it out for our teachers, and our teachers could post them outside their doors, in their classrooms, on their walls, in various places. And that got that story out. Some of those little flyers are actually still hanging in the hallways. And so that was it's still it's a thing in our school. But hopefully this year we'll even improve that more. And I'm hoping to post more colorful ones next semester. But to show you what it looked like, it's kind of long, so we had to kind of Canva it in this kind of hopefully boxed way so people could kind of follow along with it. But the gist of it was that she had gone to NC State, she went there, she had never heard of a FAFSA, and her parents were able to help her financially that first year. But eventually something happened. She no longer had the funding from her parents, and she was left thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to leave NC State. But thankfully, her financial advisor at her school actually told her that she needed to complete a FAFSA. And they asked if she had, and she said, what is that? And so they were able to complete that, and her family was able to receive financial support for her to continue staying at NC State. And this is something that a lot of our seniors hopefully will not have to experience because they will have completed the FAFSA while they're still in high school. So we're trying to hopefully increase that knowledge of the FAFSA through her story, and then have our students just try to avoid these sort of situations, which does happen. But it was really wonderful to share this story. Our person that is an anonymous person, she was really gracious to write this out for us. So I highly recommend getting those very personal stories, especially from staff members, because they know your communities more than anyone. This person had gone to first in high school, and she knew kind of the trajectories of a lot of our students and was able to meet them kind of where they were. So that was a really, yeah.
I love that. I mean, I think that when people hear from their near peers, when they hear from people that they respect or admire, I think that those are so important to even break down maybe some of the misperceptions, maybe some of
Yes.
the scary things that come alongside with FAFSA. So I appreciate and love to see how you guys have been able to kind of spread the word.
Yeah, and it goes to show too that even those families who have money and may not be eligible for Pell Grant, completing the FAFSA even when you're in high school can be a really good thing, because if something were to happen, they'd have that on file for you and be able to support you financially. And so I do encourage all families to complete a FAFSA, and this is a really good example of how that can be helpful down the road if you were to ever have any sort of financial challenges in the future. So, but I love that. That was a big part of our process.
That's great. And you make a really good and important point that I think so often folks may not always remember, is that financial situations can change. And unfortunately, for many of our students and families, that financial situation did change for them during the pandemic. Um, I know that you probably have other great tidbits to share, but I'm curious to hear. You talk a little bit about how your students on campus perhaps were on campus a little bit more than maybe some of the other students across the state. Every district was kind of, managed through the pandemic a little bit differently based on the geographic areas as well as just how they were managing COVID. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the differences that maybe you've been seeing between, the classes that you talked about, class of 2019 to 2020 to 2021?
Great.
What are some of the things that you've kind of seen throughout of those years into how you're managing and supporting your class of 2022?
Yeah, so things definitely were, and I started this position last year at the beginning of the fall semester, and that was the height of COVID, and we had kind of a lot of different high schools in one. We had some students who were hybrid, came Monday, Tuesday. Some students who were hybrid came Thursday, Friday. So those were two separate high schools in a way. And then we also had our completely virtual students, and I'm certain most schools in the state also kind of operated in a similar way. But that was kind of a challenge because not only were you going to miss students, different parts of the week, but you also had those students who were not on campus. So we tried to do, the social media stuff was, I posted this on social media, my Instagram and a couple of places, but and then we have a kind of an outlet thing that gets posted every week from our school. And so I would try and share information through that, but really it was really difficult to reach those broader populations that might not have had the best internet and were not very accessible or on campus. Thankfully, this year it's changed slightly. We're still operating in sort of a, everyone is on campus, but there is still, the concerns of, mask wearing and being socially distant in places when you're too close. But I think for us, our motives are still to reach as many students as possible. And for our FAFSA completion, this year, our challenges that we're facing right now are really just making sure everyone has knowledge about the form and what it does. And that's been something that we've been able to share a little bit more about because I've been able to do more class visits. And that's been really nice to actually see students in person and to have them all located in the classroom at one time, instead of being off campus, virtual, etc. So reaching students in the same manner all at the same time, that's been something that I've had a little bit more access to this semester, rather than it was last year. So especially because the teachers were overwhelmed and weren't really certain how to do their classes last year. It was virtual sometimes and it was in person. So those struggles are a little less so this year, but there's still, it's still difficult to reach students, especially, right now it's hard to be motivated for things like college when we're still trying to meet our basic needs, struggling to understand the financial, the obligations that come along with signing up for college. I think that can also be a big challenge. And so a FAFSA form doesn't really make a lot of sense when you're already thinking, well, it's already too expensive. So trying to overcome those barriers and those misconceptions has been challenging, but I think it's definitely easier to manage this year than it had been in the prior year, just because I feel like we do have more access to students than we had before. That's still definitely not where we want it, I don't feel like.
Now, I know you mentioned that, when considering, particularly as many from around the state might be watching this video, knowing that, we do have quite a few counselors, particularly those that are also supported from the college advisor side to first year, or maybe they switched campuses. Do you have any advice that you'd like to share with some of our counselors and our college advisors that are coming on in their first or second year?
Oh my goodness, yes. It can be very difficult to learn the process of public education and the limitations thereof. But especially with this year, a lot of it is kind of this navigating, what are we going to be doing? Are we going to have to shut down? There's still a lot of those fears of, well, what's coming next? But I think leaning into the idea that these stories are still existing, and that we need to meet those students and find them, because oftentimes they don't come to us. So I think for counselors and especially first year college advisors, it's asking those questions. Well, who are we missing? Which takes a lot of data and following up and keeping track and making note, which is oftentimes we don't have time to do. So if I could give any advice, it would be kind of that, tracking and knowing kind of where your students are. I'm not the best at it. It's so difficult, especially with caseloads of 250, and some of us have 400, 500 students per caseload. So it's not easy, but that's so important because we miss students like this who didn't know and who didn't have counselors who were actually supportive. This particular person shared, that they didn't have a counselor who thought they could go to college. And so that access to even having someone that believed in them and knew their situation, that's what these students really, really need. And so do the families. So if I had any encouragement and any advice, it would be that, although it's very difficult. So I don't know how much advice that is because it's more of a challenge. But that's kind of where I hope that our counseling and our advisors can go in that direction, hopefully have some support for that.
Great, thank you. That's really great support and advice. As you know, my future NC is really looks to lift up the practices that are happening, as well as advocating for greater supports, particularly with the number of counselors that are serving our students. College Advising Corps as a really important and integral member of any of our school support teams in helping to provide greater access to our students. And I guess my final question, and you mentioned a little bit about data, are there any things that you've really been able to use? I know that we've got the North Carolina FAFSA tracker. You mentioned in your application some of the things around CFNC and their Finish the FAFSA. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe any other ways in which you are getting additional information from your students to help you better target your supports?
Yes, I will say that I used and downloaded those CFNC tracker reports very often, especially because we did sort of a tiered raffle that was more individualized and supported students where they were. So it actually updated our raffle, sent individualized emails to them saying, hey, this is your status. And this is what you need to do to complete your verification or complete your FAFSA, or hey, you submitted it, you're good. And so that CFNC tracker was especially important because I was able to kind of month to month monitor who had completed something or not. Truly, if I hadn't had that, I don't know that I would have been able to support my students, because oftentimes they are not going to let you know, they're not going to self-report that they completed the FAFSA. And so, or maybe they think they did and they told you they did and they definitely didn't. So I had a lot of those, especially even now, students that thought they submitted it and they did not. So I think really that for me, that was a big part of it. And that's why I mentioned it in my application. But I think in terms of other types of data, especially when the student says they've done it and they haven't. So that word of mouth, that's a big way for me to kind of stay on top of how the students are doing. But yeah, that CFNC tracker, thank you to whoever came up with that. Right now, it's not updating properly. So I will say that there are issues with these things. Those forms of data collection, they don't always work properly. I currently have students who've submitted it and they're not showing up on the tracker. So there are some limitations to that, and they're aware of that. I've made sure they are aware of that. So contact between these sources is really important to let them know when something isn't working. But definitely big proponent of CFNC tracker.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I mean, I think the things that you've shared of really just having an integrated approach and open communication and dialogue amongst your administrators, as well as your teachers and your counseling teams at your schools, really lifting up those stories that inspire and finding multiple ways to meet students where they are that are meaningful to them, because you do understand your school community, you understand that particular student situation, and then using data to help you kind of prioritize and navigate through all of those various pieces. And then Jen, again, having that open dialogue to ensure that if data is something that needs to get updated, how do we kind of ensure that the entire process and system that is supportive of all of those various data trackers is aware of maybe challenges that you all are experiencing so that
Mhm.
we can better open up that access so that you can better support. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are really, really proud of you and all of the efforts that Person County and Person High School has been able to lift up to support your students. 19.2% increase, folks. These are the groups to watch. So as we go into the 2022 FAFSA Challenge that kicks off in January and ends at the end of March, we'll be excited to see you, Rebecca, and see what your high school has been able to do this year. Thanks again.
Thank you.